Hello, guys, and welcome back to another journey through history here on Bedtime History. Tonight, we're diving into a story that has fascinated scholars and dreamers alike for centuries: the rise and tragic fall of the legendary city of Carthage. Before we get cozy and begin, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it in your part of the world? Go ahead and drop it in the comments. Tonight, we're going to drift through centuries of bustling harbors, mighty navies, and unforgettable battles. You'll imagine the streets, the markets, the temples, and the lives of people long gone, all from the comfort of your bed. So, make yourself comfortable, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, and let your mind wander across the Mediterranean as we explore Carthage, a city that rose with ambition and vanished into history. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can join me on more peaceful yet thrilling adventures through time. Now, let's sail back to the beginning of Carthage's story, where it all started along the North African coast. Carthage, a city whose very name evokes images of power, wealth, and mystery, began humbly as a Phoenician colony along the northern coast of Africa. Imagine the sun rising over the Mediterranean, casting its golden light upon a small cluster of dwellings nestled near natural harbors. This was where the Phoenician settlers first arrived, drawn by the promise of trade and fertile lands. In those early days, life was simple yet filled with purpose. Families worked together to build homes, tend to small gardens, and craft goods that could be exchanged with travelers or nearby villages. The settlers quickly recognized the advantages of their location. The harbors were safe and deep, providing shelter for their small fleet of trading ships. From this natural advantage, Carthage's early leaders began to envision a city that could not only survive, but thrive amidst a competitive and sometimes hostile Mediterranean world. These settlers brought with them the cultural richness of Phoenicia. Their language, religion, and traditions were the foundation upon which Carthage would grow. Markets hummed with the exchange of dyes, textiles, and grains, and over time, a sense of community and civic pride began to emerge. It wasn't just the trade or the fertile lands that set Carthage apart, it was the settlers' vision and resilience. They understood that a city's strength wasn't measured merely by its walls or wealth, but by the determination of its people to face challenges, whether those came from rival settlements, the unpredictable seas, or the harsh African summers. As generations passed, small neighborhoods evolved into bustling districts, and the first hints of political organization appeared. Elders and influential families began to make decisions collectively, shaping the path of the city and establishing customs that would influence Carthaginian society for centuries to come. By laying these early foundations, Carthage positioned itself to become more than just a colony. It aimed to be a center of commerce, culture, and influence, where the ambition of a few could grow into the dreams of an entire civilization. And as you drift deeper into this story tonight, picture that early harbor city, quiet yet brimming with possibility, the first sparks of an empire waiting to rise along the shimmering waters of the Mediterranean. Carthage's location along the northern coast of Africa was no accident. It was a masterstroke of natural strategy that would define the city's destiny for centuries. Picture the coastline stretching before you, with gentle waves lapping against sandy shores and natural harbors hidden behind protective inlets. These harbors were more than just convenient spots for fishing boats. They were perfect for a growing fleet, allowing Carthage to control trade routes and monitor who came and went across the Mediterranean. In a world where control of the sea often meant survival, this positioning gave the city an edge that few could rival. From this vantage point, Carthage could see both the European shores to the north and the African hinterlands to the south. Traders from distant lands would dock here, bringing goods, ideas, and sometimes even threats. The city's founders understood the significance of being at the crossroads of commerce. They could send their ships westward toward the rich lands of Iberia, eastward to the Levant, or southward into the Sahara, tapping into trade networks that spanned hundreds of miles. Every merchant docking in Carthage, every caravan that passed through, added to the city's growing wealth and influence. But geography was only part of the advantage. The surrounding landscape offered natural defenses. Hills and cliffs protected sections of the city, while flat plains allowed for the cultivation of crops that would sustain the population. The Mediterranean climate, with its mild winters and warm summers, made the area suitable for both agriculture and settlement. In essence, Carthage's location provided a balance of accessibility and security, a rare combination that would allow it to flourish while neighboring regions often struggled to maintain stability. Over time, this strategic location shaped Carthage's mindset. Its citizens came to see the sea not just as a source of food or trade, but as a pathway to opportunity and power. Every ship launched from its docks represented ambition, every trade agreement a step toward dominance. And as we continue to explore Carthage's story tonight, imagine the city from above, its harbors glistening in the morning sun, fleets ready to sail across distant waters, and streets beginning to hum with the energy of a people who knew their home was destined for greatness. Carthage's economy was the lifeblood of the city, and it pulsed with the energy of merchants, craftsmen, and traders. Imagine narrow streets lined with shops, the scent of spices and fresh bread filling the air, and the constant hum of haggling as goods changed hands. From the very beginning, Carthage thrived as a hub of commerce, connecting Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Its citizens were keenly aware that wealth was not just about accumulating gold, but about establishing networks and relationships that would ensure prosperity for generations. Trade was both diverse and extensive. Carthaginians exported valuable goods like silver, gold, ivory, and precious metals, and they were especially known for purple dye made from the murex snail, a luxury item coveted across the Mediterranean. Olive oil, wine, and grains were also staples, traded for timber, ceramics, and textiles from distant lands. Ships coming into the harbors were loaded with goods from Phoenicia, Greece, and even as far as the British Isles. Every crate, barrel, and sack represented not just wealth, but influence. For controlling trade meant controlling who could access essential resources. But the economy of Carthage was not only about exports. Its bustling markets catered to the daily needs of its citizens. Artisans crafted pottery, jewelry, and tools, while farmers brought produce from the fertile plains surrounding the city. The marketplace was a social center, a place where news traveled, alliances were formed, and ideas spread. Economic prosperity also allowed Carthage to invest in infrastructure, from paved streets to defensive walls and impressive harbors. Each innovation reinforced the city's position as a powerful trading hub. Interestingly, Carthage's success in trade also shaped its culture. Wealth brought sophistication, and the city became known for its elegant homes, elaborate temples, and carefully planned streets. The citizens took pride in their economic achievements, understanding that their position in the Mediterranean world was earned through hard work, ingenuity, and a willingness to take risks. And as you picture the bustling port tonight, imagine the ships rocking gently on the water, laden with treasures from distant lands, while the city thrives on the rhythm of commerce that would define its greatness for centuries to come. As Carthage grew in wealth and influence, its social structure began to take shape, defining the lives of everyone from the ruling elites to the common citizens. Imagine walking through the city streets at dawn, merchants opening their shops, farmers bringing produce to the markets, and children running along narrow alleys. Beneath this everyday rhythm lay a carefully organized society with distinct roles and responsibilities that allowed the city to function smoothly. At the top of this hierarchy were the aristocratic families, the elites who controlled the major trading enterprises and held significant political power. These families often traced their lineage back to the earliest Phoenician settlers, and their influence extended beyond commerce into the military and religious spheres. They lived in grand houses near the harbor, their walls adorned with intricate mosaics and carvings that reflected both wealth and cultural pride. The decisions of these families could shape the fate of the city, from trade agreements to alliances with neighboring powers. Below them were skilled artisans, merchants, and minor officials. These citizens were essential to Carthage's prosperity, managing workshops, operating markets, and ensuring the city ran efficiently. They were respected for their contributions, and their lives, though less opulent, were filled with purpose and opportunity. Their children often learned the family trade from a young age, continuing the cycle of skill, labor, and commerce that kept the city thriving. At the base of the social pyramid were laborers, farmers, and, in some cases, enslaved individuals who performed physically demanding work. They cultivated the fields surrounding the city, maintained infrastructure, and handled the heavy lifting required by the bustling port. Life for them was challenging, but it was also tightly connected to the city's fortunes. Every harvest, every shipment, and every construction project relied on their efforts, making them an invisible yet indispensable part of Carthage's society. Religion and social customs further reinforced these divisions. Ceremonies, festivals, and public rituals not only honored the gods, but also reminded citizens of their place within the community. The social structure of Carthage was a delicate balance, a system that allowed the city to grow from a small coastal settlement into a formidable Mediterranean power. And as you picture this vibrant society tonight, imagine the layers of life intertwining. The elite plotting their strategies, merchants negotiating deals, and laborers working tirelessly, all contributing to the heartbeat of a city destined for greatness. Religion in Carthage was more than just a set of beliefs. It was the lifeblood that connected citizens to their gods and to one another. Imagine walking through the city on a quiet morning, the scent of burning incense drifting from temples, the soft murmur of prayers, and the rhythmic chants of priests calling upon deities for protection, prosperity, and guidance. Carthaginian life revolved around a pantheon of gods, each representing different aspects of nature, fate, and human endeavor, and the city's people devoted themselves to honoring these forces through ritual and ceremony. At the center of their worship was Baal Hammon, often depicted as a powerful figure overseeing fertility, agriculture, and the cycles of life. Alongside him stood Tanit, a goddess of protection and motherhood who held a special place in the hearts of families across the city. Temples dedicated to these gods were more than architectural marvels. They were hubs of communal life, where citizens gathered not only for religious observances, but also for festivals, markets, and civic announcements. The rituals performed within these sacred spaces reflected a deep understanding of human vulnerability, the unpredictability of nature, and the need for divine favor in both daily life and matters of state. Some of the religious practices were elaborate, involving offerings of food, precious goods, and sometimes even animals. Archaeological evidence suggests that in extreme circumstances, particularly during times of crisis or war, Carthaginians may have performed human sacrifices, an aspect of their religion that has fascinated and horrified historians alike. These rituals, while shocking to modern sensibilities, underscored the intense devotion the citizens had to securing the favor of their gods. They believed that the survival of the city itself could hinge upon the proper performance of these ceremonies. Religion also reinforced the social hierarchy. Priests and priestesses held respected positions, guiding not only spiritual matters, but also advising leaders on decisions of politics and war. Festivals and public processions offered a sense of unity, bringing together citizens from all classes in shared celebration and reverence. Through religion, Carthaginians understood their place in the cosmos, their responsibilities to each other, and the divine forces that shaped their fate. As you drift deeper into this story tonight, picture the soft glow of torches inside grand temples, the hush of expectant worshippers, and the sense of awe that must have permeated daily life. Religion in Carthage was both a guiding light and a reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and the will of the gods, a balance that would define the city's triumphs and its ultimate fall. Carthage's naval power was the cornerstone of its dominance across the Mediterranean, and it was this mastery of the seas that allowed the city to flourish. Imagine standing on the docks at sunrise, watching dozens of sleek ships lined up in the harbor, their prows decorated with intricate carvings, sails catching the morning light, and crews preparing for long voyages. For Carthage, the sea was not merely a route for trade. It was both a highway to wealth and a shield against rivals who might threaten its prosperity. From the earliest days, Carthaginians invested in shipbuilding and naval innovation. Their fleets were renowned for speed, agility, and durability. Merchant vessels transported goods ranging from gold and ivory to grains and wine, connecting Carthage to distant lands across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Meanwhile, warships, including the infamous kinkarems, allowed Carthage to project military power far beyond its shores. Every ship represented not just commerce or defense, but the city's ambition and foresight. The city's sailors were highly skilled, trained to navigate unpredictable currents, storms, and even hostile encounters. Navigation relied on both keen observation of the stars and knowledge passed down through generations. Carthaginian captains learned to read the winds and tides, understanding that mastery over the sea could determine the fate of entire campaigns and trade missions. The Navy was both a source of pride and a critical lifeline, ensuring that Carthage could maintain its influence over distant colonies and trading posts. Naval power also shaped Carthage's interactions with rivals. The city's strategic positioning allowed it to control key maritime routes, exact tolls, and negotiate trade dominance. Competitors, including Greek city-states and eventually Rome, recognized that to challenge Carthage meant facing not only its armies on land, but its formidable fleet on the water. This constant awareness of maritime strength influenced military strategies, economic policies, and even diplomatic relations. As you imagine this tonight, picture the gentle rocking of ships at anchor, the creaking of wooden hulls, and the rhythmic chants of sailors preparing for voyages that could last months. Carthage's naval prowess was more than a military asset. It was a defining characteristic of the city's identity, a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and the ambition that propelled it to the forefront of Mediterranean civilization. Even as Carthage grew in wealth and influence, the city could not exist in isolation. Surrounding it were other settlements, Phoenician colonies, Berber tribes, and emerging Mediterranean powers, each with its own ambitions. Early conflicts with neighboring cities were often as much about control of trade routes and resources as they were about pride or territorial disputes. Imagine the tension in the air as rival leaders sent envoys, traders maneuvered for advantage, and the first skirmishes tested Carthage's military mettle. The Carthaginians quickly learned that diplomacy alone could not secure their position. While they valued alliances, they also built fortifications and trained militias to protect their city and interests. Even minor disputes could escalate, whether over access to fertile land, control of key harbors, or competition in commerce. These early confrontations shaped the city's approach to defense and strategy, teaching its leaders the importance of preparation, negotiation, and, when necessary, decisive action. Trade itself was a source of tension. Carthage's growing influence threatened smaller settlements, who sometimes allied against it to protect their own interests. Each negotiation, embargo, or naval patrol became a delicate exercise in maintaining dominance without provoking open war too early. Carthage's ability to balance aggression with diplomacy in these early conflicts laid the groundwork for its later successes and survival against much larger adversaries. Cultural and social differences also played a role in these skirmishes. Carthage was a melting pot, absorbing influences from Phoenicia, Africa, and later European interactions, while neighboring cities often adhered to local customs and traditions. Misunderstandings and competition naturally arose, and Carthage's willingness to adapt, innovate, and sometimes compromise allowed it to navigate these tricky dynamics. As you drift deeper into this story tonight, picture small-scale battles along riverbanks or coastal plains, messengers rushing to deliver news, and city walls trembling with anticipation. These early conflicts were not just violent encounters, they were lessons shaping Carthage into a city capable of both diplomacy and war, preparing it for the grand challenges that would define its legendary rise. From these early challenges, Carthage began to rise not just as a city, but as an empire, a network of territories and colonies stretching across the Mediterranean. Imagine the city expanding its influence, with merchants and soldiers traveling to distant lands, establishing settlements that acted as both trading posts and defensive outposts. Carthage was no longer merely a coastal hub. It was becoming a civilization with reach, ambition, and vision that extended far beyond its walls. The rise of the Carthaginian Empire was fueled by a combination of trade, diplomacy, and military prowess. Its colonies in North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain became critical centers for resources and commerce. Each outpost strengthened Carthage's control over the Mediterranean trade routes, creating a network that allowed the empire to thrive economically while projecting power strategically. Merchants, diplomats, and military commanders carried the city's influence, ensuring that the Carthaginian presence was felt wherever their ships sailed. Internally, the empire's growth demanded organization and leadership. Political structures evolved, balancing the power of aristocratic families with councils and assemblies that oversaw trade, law, and defense. Carthage's leaders were pragmatic, often making decisions based on practical needs rather than purely tradition or prestige. This adaptability helped them maintain cohesion across a diverse empire where language, culture, and customs varied from region to region. Military expansion also played a crucial role. Carthage maintained standing armies and a powerful navy to protect its holdings and deter rivals. Its generals were renowned for their strategic thinking, blending knowledge of terrain, naval tactics, and enemy behavior into campaigns that often left competitors in awe. Even in diplomacy, Carthage understood that sometimes showing strength was the best way to prevent conflict, securing loyalty or neutrality from neighboring states. As you imagine this tonight, picture a network of cities and harbors glowing under the Mediterranean sun, caravans moving through distant lands, and fleets sailing across sparkling waters, carrying goods, ideas, and the ambition of an empire that was rising with every passing year. Carthage was no longer just a city, it was a living force, a civilization reaching for greatness, preparing the stage for both legendary victories and tragic conflicts to come. As Carthage expanded into an empire, a distinct Punic culture began to take shape. A culture that blended Phoenician roots with African and Mediterranean influences, creating a unique identity that defined the city and its people. Imagine walking through the bustling streets, where the scent of spices mingled with the rhythm of hammers at workshops, and music from lyres and drums echoed from public squares. Punic culture was visible in every corner of life, from art and architecture to social customs and personal expression. Artisans were highly respected, and their work reflected both practicality and beauty. Pottery, jewelry, and carved ivory were not only functional but also decorative, displaying intricate patterns, symbols, and motifs that told stories of gods, heroes, and daily life. Architecture combined elegance with defense, with temples and public buildings, showcasing both wealth and spiritual devotion. The famous harbors, fortified walls, and grand houses were all expressions of a society that valued sophistication as much as strength. Language and writing were essential elements of Punic culture. The Carthaginians maintained Phoenician scripts used for trade, administration, and religious inscriptions. Literacy allowed merchants to keep records of transactions across vast distances, while priests and scholars documented religious rites and historical events. Knowledge and communication were not just practical tools, they were central to maintaining the identity and continuity of the culture across generations and colonies. Religion remained a core influence, shaping festivals, rituals, and public life. Temples dedicated to Baal Haman and Tanit stood as centers of both worship and community gathering. Art, music, and storytelling often revolved around these spiritual practices, reinforcing shared values and the moral fabric of society. Even the myths and legends of Carthage, some passed down orally, reflected both pride in the city and a recognition of human vulnerability in the face of fate. Daily life, too, reflected Punic values. Families emphasized education, trade skills, and civic responsibility. The blending of influences from Africa, Phoenicia, and other Mediterranean cultures created a dynamic environment where creativity, adaptability, and ambition flourished. As you imagine this tonight, picture lively markets, artisan workshops, and grand temples, all humming with activity and purpose. Punic culture was a living, breathing identity that gave Carthage its character. A civilization proud of its roots, confident in its power, and ready to leave an enduring mark on history. Carthage's economic expansion across the Mediterranean was a carefully orchestrated dance of trade, diplomacy, and strategic settlement. Imagine fleets of merchant ships leaving the harbor, sails billowing in the wind, laden with grain, olive oil, precious metals, and the famous purple dye that made Carthaginian textiles coveted from the Levant to Iberia. Each journey carried not only goods, but also the influence of a city intent on shaping the economic landscape of the ancient world. Carthaginian colonies and trade outposts were established along the coasts of North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and southern Spain. These settlements served as both economic hubs and military waypoints, ensuring that Carthage could protect its trade routes and assert authority over local populations. Merchants exchanged not only material wealth, but also knowledge, navigation techniques, cultural practices, and diplomatic strategies that strengthened Carthage's position across the region. The city's economy thrived because of its diverse approach. It wasn't dependent on a single commodity or region. Grain from North Africa, silver from Spain, timber from nearby forests, and luxury goods from the eastern Mediterranean all converged in Carthage, creating a vibrant and resilient market. The city became a hub for artisans and traders whose skills ensured the high quality of products that circulated far and wide. This diversity helped Carthage withstand fluctuations in supply or disruptions in specific regions, a foresight that reinforced its long-term stability. Trade also influenced politics and diplomacy. Carthage often formed alliances with neighboring states or tribes to secure access to critical resources or prevent rival cities from threatening its economic interests. These alliances, sometimes cemented with gifts, marriages, or trade concessions, allowed Carthage to expand its influence without always resorting to warfare. Yet, the threat of military force always loomed in the background, reminding allies and rivals alike that Carthage's prosperity was backed by strength. As you drift deeper into this story tonight, picture a network of harbors shimmering under the sun, ships arriving and departing, marketplaces bustling with activity, and the rhythmic pulse of commerce echoing across the Mediterranean. Carthage's economic expansion was not just about wealth, it was about creating a system of influence, connectivity, and opportunity that would carry the city to the heights of power and set the stage for the dramatic conflicts that lay ahead. Carthage's military structure was as sophisticated as its trade networks, designed to protect its empire and enforce its influence across the Mediterranean. Imagine training grounds filled with soldiers drilling under the hot sun, officers giving commands, and the clatter of weapons echoing against stone walls. From the outset, the city understood that economic power alone was not enough. A strong military was essential to defend its colonies, safeguard trade routes, and deter rivals, whether neighboring tribes or the rising power of Rome. The army was organized into units with specialized roles. Infantry formed the backbone of Carthage's forces, often supplemented by mercenaries from across North Africa and beyond. These soldiers brought diverse skills and experiences, creating a flexible and adaptive fighting force. Cavalry units patrolled borders and supported campaigns in open terrain, while skilled archers and slingers provided range support during battles. Carthage's generals understood the importance of coordination, ensuring that each component of the military complemented the others in both offense and defense. Equally important was the navy, which we have seen was the city's lifeline. Carthage's warships, including fast galleys and heavily armed quinqueremes, could outmaneuver enemies and control the seas. Naval officers trained rigorously in tactics such as boarding maneuvers, ramming, and coastal blockades, making the Carthaginian fleet a formidable force that protected trade and projected power. The navy worked hand in hand with the army, allowing Carthage to respond to threats with both land and sea operations. Strategy was central to Carthage's military philosophy. Rather than relying solely on brute force, generals emphasized intelligence, reconnaissance, and careful planning. They studied enemy movements, geography, and seasonal conditions to maximize their advantage. Carthage often preferred to strike where enemies were weakest, or use diplomacy and alliances to avoid unnecessary conflict. This combination of flexibility, discipline, and innovation allowed a relatively small city-state to exert control over vast territories and withstand powerful adversaries. As you imagine this tonight, picture disciplined soldiers marching through city streets, fleets poised on calm waters, and commanders plotting maneuvers that could change the fate of entire regions. Carthage's military was more than a fighting force. It was an extension of the city's ambition, its intelligence, and its determination to thrive in a world where power and survival were inseparable. The First Punic War marked the beginning of a long and bitter struggle between Carthage and Rome, two rising powers whose ambitions could not coexist. Picture the tension in the Mediterranean as fleets prepared for battle, cities fortified, and leaders deliberated on strategy. This war, fought primarily over control of Sicily, tested Carthage's military might and its ability to adapt to a new kind of adversary. Carthage had long relied on its naval superiority and experienced mercenary armies, but Rome was rapidly learning to challenge that dominance. The conflict began as a series of skirmishes and sieges, with both sides vying for strategic positions along the coastlines. Carthaginian generals relied on their experience and knowledge of maritime warfare, confident that their fleets could outmaneuver Roman ships. However, Rome, determined and innovative, began developing tactics and ship designs that allowed them to close the gap in naval skill. Economically, the war placed a heavy burden on Carthage. Maintaining armies, building ships, and supplying distant campaigns required vast resources. The city's merchants, artisans, and farmers all contributed to the war effort, either through direct support or by supplying essential goods. This mobilization highlighted the interconnectedness of Carthage's economy and military, and how each relied on the other to maintain power. On land, Carthaginian forces faced a formidable challenge. Roman legions, disciplined and relentless, engaged in prolonged sieges and battles that tested the limits of strategy and endurance. While Carthage had the advantage of experienced mercenaries familiar with local terrain, the Romans' organizational structure and willingness to innovate created a new kind of pressure that Carthage had not fully anticipated. As you picture this tonight, imagine fleets moving silently under the moonlight, soldiers preparing for dawn attacks, and the tension of a city watching the outcome of battles that could decide the fate of entire regions. The First Punic War was more than a clash of armies. It was the beginning of a rivalry that would shape the Mediterranean world for generations, teaching Carthage both the strengths and vulnerabilities of its empire. Carthage's mastery of the sea was put to the ultimate test during the First Punic War, as naval battles became the defining feature of this prolonged struggle. Picture the Mediterranean's sparkling waters filled with ships, the sun reflecting off bronze prows, and the rhythmic beat of oars propelling fleets forward. Carthaginian commanders relied on decades of naval experience, innovative ship designs, and crews trained to maneuver with precision, making the navy both a symbol and instrument of the city's power. One of Carthage's most famous innovations was the quinquereme, a warship larger and more powerful than typical galleys, equipped with multiple rows of rowers and reinforced rams. These ships allowed Carthage to dominate the seas in terms of mobility and firepower. Crews drilled constantly, practicing coordinated movements, ramming techniques, and defensive formations that could outmatch less experienced fleets. Boarding tactics were also refined, as soldiers prepared to leap from one vessel to another, turning naval engagements into both strategic and physical confrontations. Despite these advantages, Rome quickly adapted, building its own fleets and learning from Carthaginian tactics. The Romans introduced the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed them to turn sea battles into infantry fights, essentially bringing land combat skills to the water. This innovation surprised Carthage and changed the dynamic of naval warfare, forcing commanders to adjust strategies and rethink their approach. Battles became a blend of maneuvering, ingenuity, and sheer endurance, with both sides pushing their crews and ships to the limits. The outcomes of these naval encounters were pivotal. Control of trade routes, supply lines, and coastal cities depended on dominance at sea. Carthage's economy, heavily reliant on maritime trade, was vulnerable to any disruption, and losing a major naval battle could have immediate consequences for both commerce and morale. Yet, even when faced with setbacks, Carthaginian ingenuity and experience often allowed them to recover quickly, repairing ships, retraining crews, and returning to the fight with renewed determination. As you imagine this tonight, picture the creaking of wooden hulls, the splash of oars, and the tension of commanders signaling orders across the waves. Carthage's naval battles were not merely military encounters, they were intricate tests of skill, strategy, and innovation, shaping the fate of an empire and demonstrating the extraordinary lengths a city would go to protect its power and legacy. After years of grueling conflict, the First Punic War came to an uneasy conclusion, leaving both Carthage and Rome changed forever. Imagine the city walls of Carthage bustling with activity as citizens anxiously awaited news of treaties and settlements, hoping for a respite from the constant strain of war. The peace treaty that followed forced Carthage to make difficult concessions, marking a turning point in the city's history. Under the terms of the treaty, Carthage had to cede control of Sicily to Rome and pay a substantial indemnity, straining its economy and testing the resilience of its people. The financial burden was heavy, but it also prompted Carthage to rethink how it would sustain its wealth and power in the years ahead. Merchants, traders, and farmers alike felt the pressure, yet they adapted, finding new markets and opportunities to keep the city prosperous. The treaty also highlighted the rising threat of Rome, a neighbor whose ambitions could no longer be ignored. Militarily, Carthage retained much of its navy and experience, but the loss of strategic territories revealed vulnerabilities. The city had learned firsthand that even a dominant maritime power could be challenged by ingenuity and persistence. Carthaginian generals and leaders took these lessons to heart, restructuring fleets, reinforcing fortifications, and preparing for the next inevitable confrontation with their Roman rivals. The city's approach to defense and strategy became more cautious and calculated, balancing diplomacy, commerce, and military readiness. Culturally and psychologically, the aftermath of the First Punic War left a deep impression. Citizens had endured years of uncertainty, witnessing both the triumphs and failures of their leaders. The experience reinforced the importance of resilience, adaptability, and unity. It also planted the seeds of future ambition. Carthage's leaders were determined not to allow their city to be dominated again, fueling the preparation and planning that would eventually lead to the rise of one of history's most famous generals, Hannibal. As you drift deeper into this story tonight, picture the streets of Carthage returning to a rhythm of life, markets reopening, ships setting sail once more, and citizens quietly rebuilding their city. The peace treaty was not an end, but a pause. A moment for reflection, recovery, and preparation, setting the stage for the dramatic events that would define Carthage's legendary struggle against Rome. From the aftermath of the First Punic War emerged one of history's most legendary figures, Hannibal Barca. Imagine a young boy growing up in Carthage, the city still humming with commerce, and rebuilding after the losses to Rome. Hannibal was born into a family of military leaders, and from an early age, he was immersed in stories of strategy, courage, and the struggles of his people against their eternal rival. These tales, combined with rigorous training, shaped him into a mind capable of outthinking some of the most powerful armies of his time. Hannibal's rise was not sudden. It was a careful cultivation of skill, knowledge, and ambition. He observed the successes and failures of Carthaginian generals, learning from the victories that bolstered morale and the defeats that exposed vulnerabilities. His education included both the art of war and an understanding of diplomacy, logistics, and leadership. By the time he took command of Carthaginian forces, he had already internalized lessons that would define his approach to conflict and conquest. What set Hannibal apart was his ability to think unconventionally. He was not content with simply defending Carthage's territories. He dreamed of taking the fight directly to Rome itself, striking at the heart of its power. This vision required not only courage, but also meticulous planning, strategic alliances, and innovative tactics. Hannibal understood the importance of logistics, how to move troops, supply armies, and maintain morale across great distances and hostile terrain. These skills would later be put to the ultimate test as he prepared for one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. Hannibal's rise was also a reflection of Carthage's enduring spirit. Despite the setbacks of the First Punic War, the city nurtured leaders who could challenge Rome, innovate on the battlefield, and inspire loyalty among diverse populations. Hannibal became the embodiment of that ambition, a symbol of the city's determination not to be overshadowed or subdued. As you imagine this tonight, picture young Hannibal observing drills, listening to elders recount tales of previous wars, and quietly planning in his mind the moves that could change the course of history. His rise was more than personal ambition. It was the emergence of a leader whose genius and audacity would challenge one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. Carthage, through Hannibal, was preparing to assert itself once again on the stage of Mediterranean power. The Second Punic War began as a spark ignited by old rivalries and fresh ambitions. Picture the tension thick in the air as Carthage, still smarting from the losses of the First Punic War, prepared to reclaim its position as a dominant power. Hannibal, now a seasoned commander, took the reins of the Carthaginian army, ready to challenge Rome directly on its own soil, a bold and daring strategy that few had ever attempted. The immediate cause of the conflict lay in the Carthaginian holdings in Iberia, where economic interests, territorial disputes, and local alliances created friction with Rome. Hannibal's campaigns in the region showcased his tactical brilliance. He secured loyalty from local tribes, reinforced cities, and built an army that could withstand long campaigns far from Carthage. Every decision was calculated, from logistics to troop movements, as Hannibal prepared to march toward Italy itself, a feat that seemed impossible to contemporaries. Rome, for its part, could not ignore Carthage's growing strength. The Senate mobilized legions, aware that Hannibal's audacious strategy could threaten not just territories, but the very heart of the Republic. Diplomatic envoys attempted to diffuse tensions, but Hannibal's resolve and Rome's fear of Carthaginian resurgence made negotiation futile. The stage was set for a confrontation that would span decades and test the limits of strategy, endurance, and national will. Carthage's citizens, watching from afar, felt both pride and anxiety. They knew Hannibal represented the city's ambition and hope, yet the risk of failure was enormous. Families prepared for years of uncertainty, trade networks braced for disruption, and soldiers readied themselves for a campaign that would challenge every expectation of warfare. The Second Punic War was not merely a military conflict. It was a contest of vision, courage, and the ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. As you picture this tonight, imagine the Carthaginian army assembling along Iberian rivers, supplies being loaded, and Hannibal inspecting his troops with unwavering determination. The Mediterranean and Italian landscapes awaited him, and the story of this war, its battles, strategies, and unforgettable moments, was about to unfold, leaving a legacy that would resonate for centuries. One of Hannibal's most legendary feats was his daring crossing of the Alps, a journey that tested the limits of human endurance and military strategy. Picture the Carthaginian army, tens of thousands strong, trudging through snow-covered passes, icy winds cutting through cloaks, and the treacherous terrain threatening every step. Hannibal understood that this perilous route was necessary to surprise Rome, bypassing heavily defended areas and striking at the heart of the Republic where it least expected. The journey was grueling. Soldiers and elephants alike struggled against steep inclines, freezing temperatures, and unpredictable avalanches. Food and supplies were scarce, forcing ingenuity and discipline to keep the army moving. Hannibal's leadership was crucial. He motivated his men with speeches, demonstrated resilience through his own example, and carefully calculated the timing and route to minimize losses. Every decision carried the weight of survival, and every obstacle demanded courage and improvisation. Despite the hardships, the crossing was also a marvel of coordination. Elephants, used to instill fear and break enemy lines, had to be guided carefully along narrow paths. Horses and pack animals transported essential provisions, while scouts scouted the safest passages. Hannibal's understanding of terrain, weather, and human psychology ensured that even under extreme conditions, morale and cohesion were maintained. The army emerged battered but intact on the Italian side of the Alps, a testament to the strategic genius and determination that would define Hannibal's campaigns. This crossing also had a psychological impact. Word of Hannibal's daring march spread quickly, striking fear into the hearts of Romans who had assumed their natural barriers were insurmountable. The city of Rome and its allies realized that this Carthaginian general was unlike any adversary they had faced before, resourceful, relentless, and willing to take extraordinary risks. As you imagine this tonight, picture snow-capped mountains stretching endlessly, soldiers navigating treacherous cliffs, and the quiet courage of men and animals alike pressing forward against overwhelming odds. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps was not only a physical achievement, but a bold statement of ambition and strategy, a prelude to some of the most dramatic battles in the history of the ancient world. The Battle of Trebia was Hannibal's first major engagement on Italian soil, a clash that showcased his tactical brilliance and ability to exploit both terrain and enemy expectations. Imagine the icy riverbanks where the battle unfolded, morning fog hanging low over the water, and Roman legions, disciplined but unaware, preparing to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Hannibal's careful planning and understanding of human psychology would soon tip the scales in his favor. Hannibal chose the battlefield with precision, positioning his troops along the banks of the Trebia River and concealing key units in the surrounding terrain. His plan relied on surprise and deception. When the Romans crossed the freezing waters, Carthaginian forces launched coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Cavalry units struck swiftly, flanking the enemy, while hidden infantry rose from their positions to encircle and overwhelm the Romans. The meticulous timing of these maneuvers left the Roman forces disoriented and vulnerable, demonstrating Hannibal's mastery of battlefield dynamics. Carthaginian soldiers, including mercenaries and local allies, fought with discipline and cohesion despite the harsh conditions. The morale and confidence instilled by Hannibal's leadership played a crucial role. Even as the enemy struggled across the cold river, the Carthaginians held firm, exploiting every weakness. The combination of strategy, terrain advantage, and psychological warfare ensured that the Romans were caught off guard and suffered significant losses. This victory sent shockwaves through Italy. Rome realized that it faced an adversary capable of not only surviving incredible hardships, but also outthinking and outmaneuvering its forces. The Battle of Trebia cemented Hannibal's reputation as a military genius and gave Carthage a crucial foothold on the Italian peninsula. It also demonstrated the deadly effectiveness of combining intelligence, preparation, and bold execution in warfare. As you picture this tonight, imagine the cold waters of the Trebia, the clashing of shields and swords, and the precise coordination of Carthaginian forces overwhelming the unsuspecting Romans. The battle was more than a victory. It was a statement that Hannibal and Carthage had arrived on the Italian stage, ready to challenge one of history's most formidable powers. Hannibal's genius lay not only in brute force, but in his treacherous, cunning tactics that consistently outsmarted his opponents. Imagine the Carthaginian general observing the battlefield with calm precision, anticipating every Roman maneuver and preparing traps that exploited their overconfidence. His ability to turn the enemy's strengths into weaknesses became a defining feature of his campaigns. At Trebia and later battles, Hannibal often employed ambushes, surprise attacks, and deceptive formations. He knew how to manipulate terrain to his advantage, luring enemy troops into confined spaces where their numbers counted for little, or using hidden units to encircle and trap them. In some cases, he even used psychological tactics, like feigned retreats, to draw Roman forces into vulnerable positions. Each move was meticulously planned, a chess game played on the scale of thousands of soldiers and miles of terrain. Hannibal's strategic flexibility was another hallmark of his approach. He could adapt mid-battle, shifting troops to exploit openings, responding to unexpected resistance, and turning near defeat into triumph. His leadership instilled confidence in diverse forces, mercenaries from across North Africa, Iberians, Gauls, and seasoned Carthaginian soldiers who trusted his judgment implicitly. This cohesion and trust allowed him to execute daring plans that might have failed under less disciplined command. The psychological impact on Rome was profound. Soldiers and commanders alike began to fear Hannibal's reputation almost as much as his army itself. Each encounter carried the weight of expectation, uncertainty, and the looming possibility of deception. Rome's traditional strategies, honed over generations, often faltered against his ingenuity, highlighting how innovation and cunning could rival sheer numbers in the art of war. As you imagine this tonight, picture Hannibal calmly studying the enemy, troops poised and ready, and hidden units waiting to strike at precisely the right moment. His treacherous tactics were a blend of brilliance, patience, and audacity, a reminder that victory in war often depends as much on intelligence and creativity as on strength. Hannibal's mind became a weapon just as formidable as the swords and spears wielded by his soldiers, leaving a legacy of strategy that would be studied for millennia. The Battle of Lake Trasimene stands as one of Hannibal's most brilliant and audacious victories, a perfect example of his mastery of terrain and surprise. Picture the misty morning along the northern shores of the lake, Roman soldiers marching in tight formation, unaware that Hannibal had carefully orchestrated an ambush that would trap them completely. The general's genius lay in turning the natural landscape into an instrument of war, exploiting every curve of the shoreline, every hill, and every narrow pass. Hannibal positioned his forces with meticulous attention to detail. Hidden troops waited along wooded hillsides, while the main body of the army blocked the Roman advance along the lakeshore. As the fog hung heavy over the water, visibility was limited, giving Hannibal the perfect cover to strike. When the attack began, the Romans found themselves trapped between the lake and Carthaginian forces, unable to maneuver or retreat. Panic spread quickly through the ranks, and what was meant to be an orderly advance turned into chaos. The Carthaginian cavalry played a pivotal role, striking from the flanks and rear, preventing the Romans from regrouping. Infantry units pressed forward, pushing the enemy toward the lake, while hidden contingents closed in to encircle them. The combination of surprise, encirclement, and relentless pressure left the Roman army with little chance of survival. Hannibal's use of the environment, timing, and coordinated attacks demonstrated his unparalleled ability to blend strategy with psychology, exploiting fear and confusion as effectively as physical force. The outcome of Lake Trasimene sent shockwaves through Rome. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed or captured, and the Republic's confidence in its military superiority was shaken. Hannibal's reputation grew, and his audacious methods became the benchmark for tactical brilliance. Carthage, through this victory, solidified its presence in Italy, showing that even the most powerful and disciplined armies could be outmaneuvered by ingenuity and bold leadership. As you picture this tonight, imagine the fog-laden lake, the sudden roar of attack, and the coordinated movements of Hannibal's forces trapping the Romans against the water. The Battle of Lake Trasimene was more than a military triumph. It was a masterclass in planning, deception, and the art of war, forever etching Hannibal's name into the annals of history. The Battle of Cannae remains one of Hannibal's most legendary achievements, a demonstration of tactical genius that has been studied for centuries. Imagine the fields of Apulia, sun blazing overhead, Roman legions marching confidently into battle, unaware that Hannibal had prepared one of the most devastating ambushes in military history. Every element of the battlefield was manipulated to serve his plan, turning the sheer size of the Roman forces against them. Hannibal arranged his troops in a concave formation, intentionally allowing the center to bend backward under pressure. The Romans, seeing what appeared to be a weakness, advanced, pushing into the middle of the Carthaginian line. But Hannibal had positioned his strongest infantry and cavalry on the flanks. As the Romans pressed forward, these forces closed in from the sides, enveloping the enemy completely. The result was a double envelopment, trapping tens of thousands of Roman soldiers in a deadly embrace. Cavalry units played a decisive role. Hannibal's Numidian horsemen outmaneuvered the Roman cavalry, then attacked the infantry from behind. Soldiers fought fiercely, but the encirclement left them with no room to maneuver, retreat, or regroup. Panic spread like wildfire, and what started as an orderly advance turned into chaos, with thousands of Romans killed in a single day. Hannibal's ability to coordinate such a complex maneuver on such a massive scale highlighted his mastery of both strategy and human psychology. The victory at Cannae was catastrophic for Rome, demonstrating that even the mightiest army could be outwitted through planning, deception, and timing. Yet, despite the magnitude of the loss, Rome's resilience would become legendary in its own right, refusing to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. For Carthage, Cannae solidified Hannibal's status as a military genius and became a symbol of what clever strategy, disciplined troops, and bold leadership could achieve. As you imagine this tonight, picture the concave lines of troops bending and folding, cavalry encircling the enemy, and the thunder of thousands of soldiers locked in combat. The Battle of Cannae was more than a victory. It was a demonstration of strategy elevated to an art form, a moment when Hannibal's brilliance reshaped the course of history and instilled awe, fear, and admiration that would echo through the ages. Rome's response to Hannibal's devastating victories was a testament to the resilience and determination that would define the Republic. Imagine the city streets filled with anxious citizens, the Senate convening under the weight of despair, yet refusing to surrender or negotiate. The losses at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae were catastrophic, yet Rome's leadership understood that survival required adaptability, perseverance, and unyielding resolve. The Senate implemented a strategy that came to be known as the Fabian approach, named after Quintus Fabius Maximus. Instead of engaging Hannibal directly in pitched battles, Rome focused on harassment tactics, cutting off supply lines, and avoiding confrontation unless conditions were overwhelmingly favorable. This cautious strategy frustrated Hannibal, whose genius relied on decisive engagement, but it preserved Roman forces and allowed the Republic to regroup and recover from successive defeats. Rome also reorganized its military, raising new legions and enlisting allies from across the Italian peninsula. Training intensified, discipline was reinforced, and commanders were encouraged to innovate in response to Hannibal's unpredictable tactics. The Republic's administrative and logistical systems were put to the test, ensuring that reinforcements, supplies, and intelligence flowed efficiently to the front lines. Every setback was treated as a lesson, sharpening Rome's approach to warfare and building a foundation for future campaigns. Psychologically, Rome's resilience sent a powerful message both to Hannibal and to its citizens. Despite staggering losses, the Republic did not crumble. Families mourned, soldiers trained, and alliances were maintained, demonstrating an extraordinary collective determination to survive and ultimately prevail. Hannibal's victories, as impressive as they were, could not shake the deep-rooted structures, civic pride, and unbreakable spirit that defined Rome. As you picture this tonight, imagine the Roman Senate deliberating late into the night, new recruits marching to the front, and cities rallying in support of the Republic. Rome's response was slow, deliberate, and strategic, showing that strength in warfare comes not only from genius on the battlefield, but also from resilience, organization, and the refusal to yield in the face of overwhelming odds. This unyielding resolve would ultimately play a crucial role in the eventual downfall of Hannibal and the fate of Carthage itself. The Battle of Zama marked the decisive confrontation that would ultimately determine the fate of Carthage in the Second Punic War. Picture the plains near Zama, where Hannibal's seasoned troops faced a Roman army carefully reorganized under the command of Scipio Africanus. After years of brilliant campaigns in Italy, Hannibal now faced an opponent who had learned from his tactics and adapted to challenge his once unassailable genius. Hannibal deployed his forces with the same strategic care that had brought him victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. Elephants led the initial charge, intended to break Roman lines and sow confusion. Infantry formations followed, disciplined and ready to exploit any openings. Yet, Scipio anticipated these tactics, positioning his troops to minimize the impact of the elephants, using gaps in the lines to channel them safely, while counterattacks struck from flanks and rear. The battlefield became a test of both skill and adaptation, a contest of strategy versus strategy. Cavalry played a pivotal role. Roman and Numidian horsemen clashed on the flanks, engaging in maneuvers that would decide which side could control the battlefield's edges. Hannibal's troops fought valiantly, maintaining cohesion under intense pressure. Yet the cumulative strain of years of campaigning and the strategic adjustments of the Romans began to tip the balance. Every moment required coordination, quick thinking, and relentless effort, as the outcome depended on both tactical execution and the endurance of men and animals alike. When the dust settled, Carthage suffered a crushing defeat. Thousands of soldiers were killed or captured, and Hannibal was forced to retreat. The battle signaled the end of Carthage's ambitions in Italy, and though the city would survive for a time, its power was irrevocably diminished. Zama demonstrated that even the most brilliant general could be overcome when the enemy adapted, learned, and applied strategy with precision and discipline. As you imagine this tonight, picture the elephants charging, infantry engaging, cavalry sweeping the flanks, and the tense anticipation of commanders weighing every decision. The Battle of Zama was not merely a clash of armies. It was a turning point in history, a moment where Rome's resilience met Hannibal's brilliance, and the destiny of Carthage was sealed. After the crushing defeat at Zama, Carthage faced a period of profound crisis, forced to confront the reality of a diminished empire and the rising dominance of Rome. Imagine the city, once vibrant and confident, grappling with loss and uncertainty. The streets and markets, though still active, carried the weight of anxiety as citizens realized that their city would never again wield the same power it once commanded across the Mediterranean. Economically, the consequences were immediate and severe. Carthage was required to pay a massive indemnity to Rome over decades, a drain on resources that had once fueled trade, military campaigns, and cultural projects. Trade routes were curtailed, colonies became more autonomous, and the city's influence waned in areas where it had once held sway. Merchants, artisans, and farmers all faced new constraints. Yet the people of Carthage demonstrated resilience, finding ways to sustain daily life and preserve the city's identity, despite the heavy burdens imposed by the treaty. Politically, Carthage shifted focus inward, reasserting control over remaining territories and rebuilding civic structures to maintain order and morale. The government worked to stabilize society, manage resources efficiently, and maintain loyalty among diverse populations. Carthage's leaders became acutely aware that survival required careful diplomacy, strategic planning, and avoidance of further provocation toward Rome. The city's previous expansionist ambitions were replaced by cautious pragmatism, a lesson written in both loss and experience. Socially and culturally, the defeat prompted reflection and adaptation. Carthaginian citizens drew on shared history, religious traditions, and communal pride to endure the psychological impact of military failure. Temples, rituals, and public ceremonies reinforced a sense of continuity and resilience, reminding the population that Carthage's identity extended beyond conquest. The city became more introspective, focused on consolidation and cultural preservation, while still nurturing the knowledge, skills, and traditions that had once enabled it to rise to greatness. As you imagine this tonight, picture the fortified walls of Carthage standing firm against the backdrop of a changing Mediterranean, markets humming with cautious trade, and citizens quietly rebuilding their lives. Though the empire had suffered defeat, the city's spirit endured. Carthage, after Zama, was a city humbled but not broken, preparing to navigate a world dominated by Rome while preserving the legacy and culture that had once made it a powerhouse. Even after military defeat, Carthage's cultural resilience remained a defining feature of the city. Imagine walking through its streets, where life continued with a rhythm shaped by commerce, faith, and community. Markets were alive with merchants selling spices, olive oil, textiles, and handcrafted goods, while artisans continued to create intricate pottery, jewelry, and sculptures that reflected the city's enduring identity. Carthage's culture, rooted in centuries of Phoenician influence, remained vibrant despite the pressures of loss and political restriction. Religion played a central role in daily life, providing both structure and solace. Temples dedicated to Baal-Hamon and Tanit were more than places of worship. They were centers of civic life, education, and social cohesion. Festivals, rituals, and offerings connected citizens to tradition and to each other, reinforcing shared values and collective resilience. Even children learned the stories and customs of their ancestors, preserving knowledge that ensured continuity across generations. Daily routines reflected the adaptability of Carthaginians. Families balanced work and education, teaching children the skills needed for trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. Women managed households while participating in religious and social life, contributing to the city's stability. Social hierarchies persisted, but communal pride and the importance of civic duty helped maintain cohesion across diverse populations, including those from former colonies and mercenary backgrounds. Despite Rome's dominance, Carthage maintained a sense of identity and pride. Citizens nurtured arts, storytelling, and local traditions, using cultural expression to assert a lasting presence even in a diminished political landscape. Music, theater, and poetry thrived alongside practical pursuits, creating a city that celebrated its past while cautiously navigating its present challenges. As you picture this tonight, imagine the sun setting over the harbor, children playing in courtyards, merchants closing stalls, and priests performing evening rites. Carthage's daily life, rich with tradition and adaptation, demonstrates that even in defeat, a civilization's culture can endure. The city may have been humbled politically, but its spirit, creativity, and collective memory remained alive, carrying forward the legacy of a once mighty empire. With Carthage weakened, Rome's influence across the Western Mediterranean grew steadily, reshaping the political and economic landscape. Picture Roman legions stationed along strategic points, roads linking newly controlled territories, and cities aligning themselves with the Republic's authority. Rome's expansion was methodical, blending military presence with infrastructure, trade, and diplomacy to ensure long-term dominance. Carthage, once the unrivaled maritime power, now had to navigate this new reality. Trade routes that had been under Carthaginian control were increasingly subject to Roman oversight or competition. Markets had to adjust to Roman economic pressures, and merchants learned to negotiate within the new system or find alternative channels. Despite these challenges, Carthage remained a hub of regional commerce, its ports still busy with goods from North Africa, Spain, and beyond. Politically, Rome leveraged its victories to impose treaties and regulations that limited Carthage's ability to wage war or expand militarily. The Carthaginian government was forced to comply, maintaining a defensive posture while focusing on internal stability. Roman diplomacy extended into North Africa, fostering alliances with neighboring tribes and creating a buffer zone to contain any resurgence of Carthaginian power. This period emphasized Rome's ability to combine force, strategy, and political foresight in consolidating its empire. Culturally, Carthage adapted to survive alongside the growing Roman presence. Citizens maintained traditions, religious practices, and educational systems, but increasingly engaged with Roman officials and merchants. Interaction with Rome became a necessity, fostering a complex relationship of cautious cooperation and latent rivalry. The city's resilience allowed it to endure even as the balance of power shifted decisively toward Rome. As you imagine this tonight, picture Roman soldiers marching along Mediterranean coasts, Carthaginian merchants navigating new trade realities, and citizens striving to preserve their culture amid growing foreign influence. The rise of Rome's influence marked a turning point for Carthage, a city once dominant now, forced to survive in a world where the Republic dictated the rules, setting the stage for the final chapters of its story. Even under the shadow of Rome's growing power, Carthage made desperate attempts to recover its former strength. Picture the city's leaders convening in council chambers, debating strategies to rebuild the economy, reinforce defenses, and restore influence. While the scale of ambition had shifted, the spirit of determination remained undiminished. Carthage sought ways to leverage its commercial expertise, maritime skills, and alliances to regain some measure of autonomy. Economic initiatives focused on revitalizing trade and production. Carthaginian merchants sought new markets beyond Rome's immediate control, while artisans and farmers worked tirelessly to sustain the city's prosperity. Shipyards remained active, maintaining a fleet sufficient for commerce and coastal defense. Though Rome imposed strict limitations on military expansion, Carthage relied on ingenuity and diplomacy to maximize its limited resources. The city demonstrated remarkable adaptability, proving that survival required more than brute force. It demanded strategic thinking and resilience. Politically, Carthage strengthened internal unity. Civic leaders emphasized cooperation among factions, ensuring that the city's population remained focused on recovery rather than succumbing to fear or despair. Religious and cultural institutions reinforced collective identity, reminding citizens of Carthage's proud heritage even as external pressures mounted. These efforts were vital in maintaining morale and fostering a sense of purpose despite growing constraints. However, every effort at recovery was overshadowed by the looming presence of Rome. Carthage's attempts at regaining influence were closely monitored, and any perceived defiance risked provoking retaliation. The tension between survival and ambition defined this era, as the city navigated a delicate balance between rebuilding and avoiding another catastrophic confrontation. As you imagine this tonight, picture bustling marketplaces, shipyards alive with activity, and council chambers filled with determined leaders. Carthage's last attempts at recovery were a testament to resilience, creativity, and the unyielding will to endure, even in the face of a dominant power like Rome. The city's struggle to reclaim its former glory serves as a poignant reminder of ambition tempered by necessity, as the stage was quietly set for the ultimate chapter in Carthage's story. The Third Punic War marked the final tragic chapter in Carthage's long struggle against Rome. Imagine the city once again preparing for conflict, this time facing an opponent determined not to leave its rival standing. Roman ambitions, fueled by fear, revenge, and strategic calculation, aimed to eliminate Carthage permanently. Citizens, soldiers, and leaders knew that the stakes could not have been higher, as the city's very existence was at risk. The siege of Carthage was relentless. Roman legions encircled the city, cutting off supplies and systematically weakening defenses. Hannibal's successors, though brave and resourceful, could not match the overwhelming numbers and strategic planning of the Romans. Every street became a battleground, every gate a line of defense, and every tower a symbol of resistance. Citizens were drawn into the struggle, contributing to fortifications, rationing food, and supporting the army as best they could. Despite the dire situation, Carthaginians displayed extraordinary courage. They launched sorties, repaired walls under fire, and resisted Roman advances with determination. But the city's resources were finite, and the protracted siege began to take its toll. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion sapped both civilian and military strength. Even as Carthage fought valiantly, the relentless pressure of Rome's siege engines and disciplined soldiers slowly eroded the city's ability to resist. Ultimately, after years of encirclement and battle, Carthage fell. The city was systematically destroyed, its walls torn down, its buildings burned, and its population decimated or enslaved. Rome's victory was complete, a chilling demonstration of what happens when ambition, rivalry, and power converge with unforgiving determination. Carthage, once a thriving hub of commerce, culture, and military might, was erased from the map, leaving behind only memories and the enduring legacy of its achievements. As you imagine this tonight, picture the smoke rising from the city, soldiers pressing forward relentlessly, and the citizens fighting to preserve their home against impossible odds. The Third Punic War and the siege of Carthage were more than a military defeat. They were the dramatic conclusion to a story of ambition, resilience, and human ingenuity, marking the end of an empire that had once shaped the Mediterranean world. Even after its destruction, Carthage's legacy endured, leaving a mark on history, culture, and the imagination of generations to come. Imagine the remnants of the city, smoldering ruins, abandoned streets, and a once bustling port now silent, yet the memory of its people, achievements, and innovations lived on through stories, trade knowledge, and cultural influence. Carthage became a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and ambition, teaching lessons about the rise and fall of civilizations. Carthage's contributions to maritime trade, navigation, and urban planning influenced regions far beyond its walls. Its sailors had charted the Mediterranean, trading goods, ideas, and technologies that would ripple across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The city's commercial networks, legal structures, and cultural practices inspired both allies and adversaries, leaving echoes that persisted even under Roman dominance. Scholars, historians, and storytellers preserved these lessons, ensuring that Carthage's ingenuity was not forgotten. Militarily, Hannibal's campaigns became legendary, studied for centuries as examples of strategy, leadership, and tactical brilliance. Generals and scholars dissected his battles, from the ambush at Trebia to the encirclement at Cannae, extracting lessons about terrain, deception, and psychological warfare. His legacy reminded the world that clever strategy and audacity could challenge even the most powerful forces, shaping military thought for generations. Culturally, the city's Phoenician roots continued to influence art, religion, and language in the region. Traditions, religious practices, and artistic motifs spread across North Africa and Mediterranean settlements, subtly blending into the emerging Roman world. Even in defeat, Carthage's identity endured, carried in the collective memory of its people and the societies that inherited its innovations. As you imagine this tonight, picture Carthage not as a city lost to time, but as an enduring symbol of ambition and brilliance, a civilization that dared to challenge the greatest empire of its era. Its ruins whispered lessons of resilience, innovation, and the consequences of rivalry, leaving a story that continues to inspire awe and reflection long after the fires of the Third Punic War faded into history. Carthage lives on in history and memory long after its physical city was destroyed. Imagine the ruins gradually fading into the landscape, yet the stories of its rise, brilliance, and ultimate fall echoing through centuries of historians, scholars, and storytellers. The city's narrative became a cautionary tale, a source of inspiration, and a subject of fascination for generations seeking to understand ambition, resilience, and the consequences of rivalry. In the centuries that followed, Carthage influenced Rome itself. Roman engineers, merchants, and military thinkers absorbed lessons from the city's sophisticated trade networks, urban planning, and naval expertise. Hannibal's campaigns, in particular, left an indelible mark on military theory, demonstrating how intelligence, strategy, and audacity could overcome overwhelming odds. Carthage's legacy became a benchmark against which leaders and historians measured courage and ingenuity. Culturally, Carthage continued to resonate in literature, mythology, and art. Its Phoenician roots, religious practices, and architectural achievements influenced neighboring civilizations, while its dramatic fall became emblematic of the fragility of even the most powerful empires. Writers across time portrayed Carthage as both tragic and heroic, a city that dared greatly, fought valiantly, and ultimately succumbed to forces beyond its control. These stories preserved the essence of Carthaginian identity, ensuring that the memory of its people endured. Today, Carthage is a symbol of human ambition and the lessons of history. Archaeological ruins, ancient texts, and cultural references keep the story alive, reminding us of the delicate balance between power, strategy, and hubris. As you picture this tonight, imagine walking through the once bustling streets, hearing echoes of commerce, the rhythm of oars on the Mediterranean, and the cries of warriors and citizens alike. Carthage remains alive in memory, a city that shaped the ancient world and continues to inspire curiosity, reflection, and admiration. And so, as we come to the end of our journey through the story of Carthage, take a moment to imagine the rise and fall of this extraordinary city. From a thriving hub of commerce and culture to the battlefield strategies of Hannibal, and finally to its ultimate destruction, Carthage's history is a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and resilience. It reminds us that empires, no matter how powerful, are shaped by decisions, leadership, and the unpredictable forces of rivalry and fate. As you drift off tonight, consider the lessons embedded in Carthage's story, the importance of strategy, the strength of collective effort, and the enduring power of cultural identity. Though the city's walls were torn down and its streets silenced, its spirit lives on in the lessons it left behind, in the study of history, and in the imaginations of those who reflect on its story. It's a tale that bridges time, connecting us to a world that once thrived on the shores of the Mediterranean, teaching resilience in the face of adversity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lost city of Carthage. I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it as you hear this story? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed exploring history in this soft, immersive way, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can drift off into more stories from the past. Rest easy and let the echoes of Carthage's past guide you into dreams filled with the wonder of history, the bravery of its people, and the lessons that endure long after empires fall.